Hi everyone, I'm joined by Dave, who's part of the Shekel Hunter community here on YouTube. They believe in something they call the Hebrew, a legendary cryptid also known as a Jewpacabra, which you'll probably remember as the mythical creature from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Dave, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I understand that you had your first Hebrew encounter way back in 1971. Let's start all the way back at the beginning.
Sure. Well, I had just turned 16 years old, got my driver's license, and on a Saturday night, my dad said, "Why don't you take the car and just drive into town?" I rode into town, went by and picked up a friend of mine, and to kind of preface all that, in this area, on the outskirts of town in the country, there'd been a rash of people having their chicken coops broken into, things like that, barns broken into. And people had actually sighted some type of creature.
Sorry, you're saying they've actually sighted a Hebrew?
Now, at this point in time, it was never referred to. People referred to it as the monkey man. So I went by and picked my friend up, and I said, "Well, hey, let's look for the monkey man." So he said, "Yeah, sure." So probably mile and a half north of town was what had been the black school prior to integration.
Sorry, you went looking for a monkey man and you decided to go to a black segregated school.
So we'd ride up to the school, turn around in the parking lot, drive back to town. You know, we weren't really on a mission and weren't really doing anything but just killing time on a Saturday night. Well, probably the third or fourth loop, we turned around in town, headed back up toward the school, and all of a sudden, from the right-hand side of the road, this thing just came out onto the road right in front of us. I had to slam on brakes to keep from actually hitting it. We were so close to it, and, you know, I distinctly remember thinking, boy, am I going to be in trouble if I damage the family car, because back then there was one car for every family. So luckily we didn't hit it. It just crossed the road. It disappeared into the darkness. So that was maybe 2-3 seconds at the most, but it was so close, and the headlights were so bright on it. You know, we got a real good look at it, saw a lot of details and features and that kind of thing.
That's almost unbelievable. You saw a Hebrew in the flesh up close. I mean, how big was this thing?
This thing, as I think back, was probably 5 to 5.5 feet tall. It was actually kind of skinny. I remember thinking it was scrawny looking, like it maybe wasn't healthy. It had dark red hair, not extremely long, but maybe 2 inches, something like that. And I saw a real clear side profile of it. It never turned and faced us. It really just acted like it didn't even know the car was there. It just came across the road and continued.
So you said that you got to see it for very, very intensely for a few seconds. What was the thing, what was the most distinct thing about it, the thing you remember the most?
But the most distinct thing about this whole experience was the way that it moved. And when you and I talked before, I told you it reminded me of a Nordic skier, where the arms and legs kind of glide in sync. That's the form of locomotion it used. I do remember its arms looked too long for the body. They were extremely long and kind of swinging back and forth, like I said, in unison with its legs as it crossed.
What was its posture like as it ran across the road?
It wasn't stooped to the point where that stuck out in my mind. It wasn't leaned back like it was really digging in either. It was more just kind of an upright or maybe a slight lean forward.
So you said that a police officer had also spotted a Hebrew in the local area. Is this the same one or what?
It was in, you could say, the immediate area, but it was actually a little closer into town, a cemetery on the edge of town. The police officer pulled up and was sitting there, and he looked in his rearview mirror, and he saw something approaching him. And as it got closer, all he had was, I think, a .38 service revolver with it, and it frightened him to the point where he he didn't think he was gunned up enough, so he got out of there pretty quick.
Yeah, that does sound pretty scary, actually. Is that the first time he saw the Jewpacabra, or were there other times?
No, that would be the only one that I know of as far as law enforcement officer was concerned. But apparently it was trying to approach him from the rear with ill intent, he felt, so I guess he was trying to sneak up on him.
I've heard that they can be sneaky. It does make you wonder what's going through its mind, though, doesn't it? You know, I mean, if it's trying to sneak up on you, then the outcome it's looking for can't be good.
I would agree.
Wasn't there also a farmer who claimed he'd spotted a Hebrew out while walking his dogs?
Well, it was a farmer who had some hounds, and apparently they treed.
Sorry, what do you mean by treed?
The dogs, it was obvious they had something treed, and it was some kind of creature.
The dogs had chased a Hebrew up a tree?
If I remember correctly, I believe it actually jumped out at one point and started slinging the dogs around, and the dogs ran, and the farmer realized that this is not where I need to be, so he left as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame him. So you said you grew up on a farm, and there was at one point a spate where a bunch of the animals were having, well, their blood drained from them. Is that it? And that's why you call it the Jewpacabra, right?
Sure. We had horses, cows, had a pet goat, ducks, chickens, the typical farm animals. When my brother and my sister and I would get home from school, it was our job to, first of all, kind of take a head count, make sure everything was okay, and feed the livestock. Well, we got home one day, and we couldn't find one of the horses, a big Palomino stud horse. We spent a couple of hours looking for him and couldn't find him anywhere, so it's kind of a last resort. I went to a part of the property which was pines and mixed hardwoods, just really no grazing, so the horses never stayed in that part of the property. So I'm walking down kind of a logging road, and on the left side is a wet weather branch. It's kind of a deep gully or ravine that in the wet part of the year, there's a branch that runs through it. Well, I didn't see anything, but I heard something making a noise, kind of grunting or snorting. So I went over and looked down in the ditch, and the horse was laying there upside down with his feet up in the air. And in the area around him, as I got to looking around, man, it looked like the ground had just been swept clean. There were pine saplings, sweet gum saplings that were snapped off, just broken at the ground, and looked like a real, almost battle had taken place. So we took a tractor and drug the horse out. He was just so beat up and banged up he couldn't stand up. We eventually had to have him put down, but he had no marks, no sign of predation, just all severe internal injuries.
That is very strange. Can you tell me about the last time you encountered a Hebrew? What happened?
Sure. This would have been probably the mid-'80s. I had left work. I had planned on stopping by and trying to roost a turkey before I went home. I walked in up to a loading ramp, which is really just a flat top of a ridge where the paper company would drag the pines and load them up to that particular area, and waited till well after dark, never did hear the turkey, so I headed back down the road to my truck. And, just by virtue of being in the woods and being alone, you just tend to be kind of quiet. On the right side of me, the landscape sloped up. On the left side, it sloped down pretty sharply into a fairly deep hollow or valley. I noticed that it was like something was shadowing me, paralleling me, but a few yards behind me down in the bottom of this hollow, and I could hear limbs as they moved, brush, briars, that kind of thing. So I stopped and just listened and kind of turned in that general direction. And it was almost like this really angered whatever it was. I could hear it start snorting or huffing at me.
Well, I mean, I know all the stereotypes, but aren't you kind of overplaying the, nostril size somewhat?
But the activity with limbs, brush, and things started to increase to the point where it actually sounded like whatever it was breaking fairly large limbs or saplings down. At this point, I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around, what is this? Is it just a really angry deer, or is it a bear? And I remember thinking, we don't have bear here. What could this be? The longer I stood there, it was like the more angry it became. And it started making this kind of grumbling roar, not incredibly loud. It was clearly audible and really unnerving. And at this point, I'm just kind of standing there because I want to figure out what this is. But I'm certainly nervous at this point. And here again, I'm just thinking, well, could it be a bear? Do we have bear here now, or has one gotten in here some way? And the longer I stood there, you could just tell that it was angry, it was hostile. It did not want me there. And then probably the most bizarre thing of the whole experience was I noticed every time it would make this real low kind of rumbling sound, growling sound, my shotgun, I had a Remington 1100 that I'd set up for turkey hunting, in my hands, and every time it would make this noise, my gun would vibrate. And it wasn't from me being scared and shaking. I'm not saying I wasn't scared, but the gun would just rattle. And that just unnerved me for some reason. I didn't have explanations or a thought process that would explain any of this anymore. So when I noticed the gun doing that, I turned and I think it's fair to say ran as fast as I could in the dark back to my truck, got in the truck and got out of there.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for calling in, Dave. I've got to admit, I'm not convinced that you saw an actual Hebrew. I mean, I think it was just a Bigfoot.